All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake KEARNAN, and joining me as always is MARTYN SADLER, the editor of League Express. How was your weekend, Martin?
Oh, it was pretty good, Jake. I was delighted to see England winning again. There was a lot of debate about how good the game was. Some people saying it was quite a dull match. Some people saying how much they enjoyed it. It was certainly a slightly subdued atmosphere, I thought, at Huddersfield. And, you know, a disappointing crowd of just under 11,000. We probably would have hoped for more. But I think there are quite a few reasons for that we'll come to during this podcast, and I quite enjoyed watching the highlights of the Australia versus New Zealand game as well in the Pacific Cup, and we're looking forward to them playing again in Hamilton this weekend. And I thought the Fijians did really great to get a very decisive win over the Kumuls in Port Moresby. So, and we may want to talk about that as well. Yeah. So it's been a lively weekend, really, of Rugby League. And, of course, we had all that business about the IMG gradings to digest over the last few days as well. So no doubt we'll talk quite a lot about that as well today. So awful lot to talk about, Jake.
That's right. That's for sure. I think the Fiji result really surprised me, and there's no doubt that divided a lot of fans, the IMG grading. So, we'll dive into that a little bit later, but we'll kick it off with the England versus Tonga matchup. England 14 defeated Tonga 4. Rainy and wet conditions, it sort of limited the attack a little bit. But and as you stated, 11,000, which in the eyes of some is quite a disappointing crowd figure.
Well, it should be more, clearly. I mean, if England are going to play test matches, I think we always hope to see a full stadium. But there are various reasons why it wasn't, but we'll come to those in a moment. But let's look at the game itself first. And of course, the star of the show, in many people's eyes, was Matty Ashton, who touched down for a couple and was most people's man of the match, and he only came in because Tommy Makinson was injured. So what a great game for him. And 12-0 at half time. The Tongans came back a bit in the second half. They played better in the second half, certainly, but could only score one try and an unconverted one, and it was 14-4 in the end. Interestingly, in this Test series, we all thought the Tongan pack might get on top of the English pack, but I don't think they have done, have they? I think the English pack have handled them very confidently and well, and we've now got to see whether that continues on Saturday at Headingley.
Absolutely. And they remind me of, the old saying, they're a V8 car or a V8 engine without a steering wheel at the moment, I feel like,
yes,
Tonga.
I think so.
And you can have a really great forward pack, and we've seen this over the years as evidence of it, but if you don't have that half back or scrum half or standoff that can steer that team around the field, you're going to have problems. And
I think Harry Smith at scrum half is, an outstanding player at the moment, not only for his ability to steer the team around the pitch, but also because his goal kicking is excellent, which was a problem earlier this year. He went through a really deep trough of missing a lot of kicks that he should have got, but he's been coached by Paul Grayson, the ex-England Rugby Union international who used to play for Northampton. And, Grayson, to give him credit, seems to have inspired a lot more confidence in Harry Smith, and that's great to see, isn't it?
Absolutely. Now, Sean Wayne, he's obviously got a few selection headaches upcoming towards this weekend, I should say. But what does he do? Does he bring George Williams back into the team?
Well, he said he will do. Okay. I mean, he's made it fairly clear that he will do, and I think the guy who will make way for him is Mikey Lewis. I can't see him dropping Harry Smith for George Williams. And George Williams and Harry Smith, I think their game complement each other. If you say, if you look at Mikey Lewis and Harry Smith and you say, well, which of those two players is George Williams most like? I think you probably say Mikey Lewis, because, George Williams is always, on the verge of breaking through with great footwork and so on. But also, the great thing about him and the way that he might complement Harry Smith, I think Harry Smith's got a good a good last set kicking game. is good at kicking deep into the opposition defence. He's always got the chance of kicking a 40-20. I think George Williams' great strength is his short kicking game near the opposition try line, which he showed an awful lot when he was playing in the NRL with Canberra, by the way. But I think that I think the combination of both of their kicking games will be really interesting to watch, and I think there will be a much bigger crowd at Headingley on Saturday, by the way, just as an aside. But I think, and it would be hard luck on Mikey Lewis, who's not done a damn thing wrong, has he? And has played with such incredible enthusiasm and commitment. But I suspect, as I say, that he might have to sit out this game, or he may be on the bench, but I rather doubt that Sean would put Mikey Lewis on the bench, if I'm honest about it.
I'd like to see him in the number 14 jersey, personally. I think he would create a great spark, towards the end of the first half off the bench through the middle.
Yes, he could come on against a tiring pack. There's no doubt about that.
So, we'll see. On the Tongan side, I wouldn't mind seeing a few changes. I wrote an article in this week's edition of the League Express newspaper. I want to see Christian Wolf hand the keys to the young gun.
He's got nothing to lose now, has he, in doing that? You might as well go for broke. They've lost the series, but they want to regain some pride and so on. And why not? I think, he wants to have a look, no doubt, at all of his players. And, maybe some of the players who you've suggested could deliver the goods.
And I don't know what that looks like, whether they move Isaiah Katoa to 9, because they've had some issues around dummy half there, and especially with their fifth tackle options, a lot of their kicks just haven't been effective. They've been putting up high kicks that have been diffused by England's back three, and when they're catching the ball on the full, it's almost like they should just go back to just putting a little kick in behind and finding the ground to sort of buy a little bit of time. But when you're giving it straight to the chest of Jack Wellesby, he's going to get his side on the front foot. So, back to the drawing board for Tonga. And, they're going to have to try and win this match to restore a little bit of pride in the jumper and not make this series, a whitewash.
I don't think the Tongans got a single repeat set, if I remember rightly. With earning a goal line dropout, and I think that just illustrates how ineffective they were.
Absolutely. And just for a little bit of background on Latu Fainu, the young gun we're talking about, he hasn't debuted in the NRL yet, but he was in the Manly Sea Eagles system alongside his brother, and West Tigers came through and poached the pair of them for, I think it was $4 million over 4 years or something ridiculous, which is unheard of for a player who hasn't debuted. So, we'll see what Christian Wolf does. He hasn't named his side yet, I don't believe, as of us, recording this podcast. Yeah. So we'll see what the week brings. But, hopefully we can get a full crowd to Headingley this weekend. It would be a great way to finish. It
would be good to do so. I think we're more likely to see a higher crowd at Headingley than we saw at Saints and at Huddersfield. And, it's interesting to reflect, isn't it? We said we'd talk about why the crowds have been a bit disappointing. One reason is because we've not had a Tongan Test series before, so people perhaps didn't quite know what to expect. We know how good potentially the Tongans are, but maybe not every rugby league fan in this country does. But also, Jake, we had the ludicrous situation last week of the Rugby Football League releasing or having a press conference about the IMG gradings on Wednesday, which they timed for 12:30, and that was exactly the same time that England were having a press conference to promote the game at Huddersfield. Which idiot scheduled those two events to be, to go on at the same time? Which idiot did that? And the whole thing, and as soon as they released the grading results, the whole of the attention of the rugby league world in this country switched to the impact of those gradings. The England versus Tonga game at Huddersfield was lost really from that point onwards in terms of any promotion of it. People only wanted to talk about the gradings. It goes without saying that if you're going to make an announcement that's that big, that important, you should have waited until the end of the Test series
Absolutely.
to do it. Don't do it when it distracts attention from what's really important, which is the Test series. And in particular, don't run the press conference at precisely the same time as an England press conference. It's crackers. And, we just got a sport that doesn't know how to promote itself, haven't we, I'm afraid, in this country at least.
I tell you what, though, I think being a member of that RFL media team, they would have been fielding a few calls just after that presser was announced.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Another thing I'd like to bring up, Martin, is the ticket prices. So 25 quid per ticket for adults. Now, I did a little bit of digging into what the tickets are selling for in the Southern Hemisphere. And for this weekend, for a general admission ticket to the Australian versus Kiwis match over in Hamilton is 5 quid. A bronze, which is a little bit better than general admission, is £7.50. Silver is £17. Gold is £37. And a platinum ticket is about £43. So just for a bit of comparison there, obviously, they might be able to put up cheaper tickets due to larger crowd numbers, but just for a bit of perspective.
Well, that shows if you're only charging £5 or dollars, did you say?
Pounds.
£5 to get into. So I assume that's $10, is it? Or
yeah,
so?
roughly $10.
Roughly 10 Kiwi dollars. If you're only charging that much to see New Zealand play Australia in the Pacific Cup final, it shows that you've got an awful lot of ground to make up as an international sport. But at least they're doing it, from the bottom up, so to speak. And, hopefully they'll get a full house in Hamilton. It's about 20,000, isn't it, the capacity of the stadium there. And, I'd love to see them cheer New Zealand to victory. I really would, with no disrespect to you as an Aussie. But, what you've got to accept is that if you're not a major draw, which unfortunately International Rugby League isn't at the moment, then you've got to have either very clever ways of marketing to get people to come and see the game, or you've got to lower your prices to, get a stadium that looks full or nearly full. So yeah, it's interesting. I didn't know that it was as cheap as that. I'm almost tempted to fly over myself for that game now. But yeah, we'll see how it works out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if they get a full house, I'm sure they'll be happy with what they did.
Now, I want to ask you this question. It might ruffle a few feathers, Martin, but can any of the onus for the poor crowd attendances be put on the fans?
On the fans? Well, I mean, obviously, a lot of fans didn't turn up, and it would have been nice if they had. But I also think there is a feeling. I'm not sure whether most fans think that England play a very attractive style of rugby, to be honest. And Sean Wade made it absolutely clear, didn't he, that winning was the important thing, not the style of winning. And I can understand him saying that, but the trouble is, for the fans love to see attractive open rugby, and the rugby at Huddersfield on Saturday was, for the most part, not particularly attractive and not particularly open. But having said that, if you later on in the night watch the Rugby Union World Cup final, then you see what a game that is, has virtually no open rugby is all about, And yet a lot of people said that was a great game. I've got to say, I couldn't see how they could draw that conclusion. And the most interesting stat to come out of that, Jake, was that South Africa have now won the World Cup 4 times, and on 3 of those occasions they didn't score a try.
Wow.
So that's the other code. That's their problem. And, I think, they're in danger of a lot of their fans losing interest in their sport, because it's really become so attritional and so dull at the moment, sadly for them.
And especially with how easily players can get sent off in their game.
Oh, indeed.
That sort of ruined the final the other night for me.
Yeah, the All Blacks captain got sent off, and from that point onwards, you couldn't see them winning, could you? And it was the really weird thing was that he got a yellow card, and then sometime later, while he was still off the pitch serving the time for the yellow card, they changed it to a red card. and isn't that odd? I mean, that's not something I don't think we've seen in rugby league, even with a bunker in the NRL. So I think they've got major problems in rugby union. But let's get back to our sport anyway.
No,
you know, so there were a lot of different opinions on whether the game was a good game or not. In fact, there's an interesting letter in our newspaper this week, and I'll just read it to you because it's somebody having a bit of a go at one of the BBC pundits.
That's right. And for our listeners, don't forget, if you do want to get your subscription to this League Express weekly newspaper, head along to www.totalrl.com/shop.
And if you get a copy of the paper, there are lots of interesting letters this week in our mailbag. But one guy, Bill Rees from Wakefield, saying, I watched the England game against Tonga and I was disappointed with the performance of the BBC's pundit, John Wilkin. John was scathing in his comments about a game that I actually enjoyed. And he said, any broadcaster should know that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So to lambast the match in front of a BBC audience was misjudged and insulting to the players who had taken part in the game in admittedly difficult conditions. And he goes on to say that watching the World Cup final in rugby union, the commentators never criticise any aspect of it.
No.
The commentators are always incredibly positive about that sport, and that's true. And you know, as a reporter or as a commentator on TV, you know, it's very unwise to make value judgments about the quality of the game you're watching, because some people will actually probably love it and some will not like it. But, you know, everybody sees it differently. And I'm reminded of an occasion many years ago when we used to have a guy who did a lot of our Wigan home reports. And he was very good at what he did. But on one particular weekend, Wigan played, I think it was Castleford, if I remember rightly. And Wigan played badly that day, and Castleford got an unexpected win. And the reporter in our paper, his match report, said this was a damned awful game, and he said it, you know, it was hardly worth watching, and blah blah blah. And he was clearly writing it from a Wigan point of view. We then got an absolute basket full of letters from Castleford supporters who'd been to the game saying it was the most exciting game they'd ever seen.
Oh, right.
You know, because they'd won at Wigan.
Yeah.
So always bear in mind that, you know, you might not be enjoying it much, but there's probably somebody who is.
No, absolutely
and,
right.
you know, it's not wise for you to you know, to assume that because you don't like it, nobody else does.
Absolutely. And like, I think attackingly, yes, it might have come across as a boring game, but you've got to commend England's line speed and hunger and defence.
Absolutely.
They were just going out
They're committed.
for blood,
yeah,
weren't they?
They showed enormous commitment, and you know, you've got to pay credit to them pay credit for that. And you know, you sometimes something isn't spectacular, but you've got to admire the effort and the commitment that players put in, and you know that applies in all sorts of sports, not just rugby league. I mean, you know, there's a lot of, I don't know whether you saw the big boxing match at the weekend when Tyson Fury fought Francis Ngannou, the guy who's the Cameroonian who was a martial arts specialist who took Fury on and took him very, very close to a points, you know, decision after 10 rounds. But a lot of people said, you know, that was a hell of a bad performance by Fury, but they didn't give Ngannou the credit that he deserved for that. And I think you've always got to look at both sides. You know, one team might seem to play badly, but the reason is often because the other team plays well.
He looked so comfortable in that ring, Francis Ngannou. He really surprised me.
His first ever professional boxing fight, yeah. Well, he had been coached by Mike Tyson,
That's
hadn't he?
right.
So, you know, that's quite an advantage. And the thing about him, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about that fight since it took place, and Tyson Fury seemed uncharacteristically quiet after it. But the truth is that when you're in mixed martial arts, those guys have got incredible upper body strength, you know, because they're wrestling, they're fighting each other. It's not just they're not just hitting each other, they're, you know, fighting each other in various ways. And Fury can normally push his opponents around the ring, but he couldn't do that with Ngannou.
No.
And that was the thing that sort of upset his rhythm. But anyway, that, again, Tyson Fury. Worth talking about him because when he was in Australia a few months ago at the time of the State of Origin, he was interviewed in Brisbane wearing a Queensland State of Origin shirt, and I think Tyson Fury might have quite a liking for rugby league, and he's absolutely worth a fortune now, of course. And good luck to him. Great fighter, great personality. And I'd love to see somebody persuade him to buy a rugby league club, because obviously he's coming to the end of his boxing career, and I'd love to see him, get involved in our sport, buying a club, perhaps buying Salford, who knows, somebody like that to, to give him an interest to pursue after he eventually retires. I think he'd be a great figure in our sport if we could bring him on board.
No, absolutely. And also, I think, now this is a bit of a strange relationship in our community, but Pat Richards, I believe he has some sort of connection with Conor McGregor. I think...
Yes, I think he... Well, they're both Irish. I mean, Pat Richards, is it Donegal his Irish ancestors come from? I think it might be. Yeah. Because I think Luke Ricketson was also, from that part of the world, perhaps. But I think Pat. I once talked to Pat, and I'm sure he said that his family originally come from Donegal. The more people like that we can get on board, because the thing about people involved in sports like boxing or martial arts is that I think they can appreciate the physicality of our game. They know that it's a tough, demanding game, and one that they could perhaps see themselves playing if circumstances had turned out differently. If obviously Conor McGregor had been brought up in Wigan, he would have almost certainly been a rugby league player, wouldn't he?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Alex Volkanovski, one of our greatest UFC fighters, he came from a rugby league background. There you go.
I don't know much about UFC, but I know more about boxing. But they're all great sportsmen, aren't they? These guys.
No, absolutely. And good to hear Tyson Fury knows which state to pick. So
yes,
that's also
course.
Great to know.
Well, it was in Brisbane, though. I mean,
can't wear a Blues jersey.
No,
he'll get mobbed. Now, we'll take a look at the Australia versus New Zealand game. Australia 36 defeated New Zealand 18. This surprised me a little bit. I thought New Zealand would be a bit more competitive, but Australia too good in the end.
Well, I thought they'd be more competitive, especially after beating Samoa 50 points to 0. I mean, gosh, it could hardly be more convincing, could it? But to give credit to the Australians, whenever you think the Australians are going to be in danger of being beaten by somebody, they always rise to the occasion and show that there's no way that they're going to lose. This weekend they'll be playing New Zealand in the final, as we've already said, in Hamilton, in New Zealand. But I'm not going to be foolish enough to tip New Zealand to win. I mean, New Zealand looked absolutely tremendous against Samoa, but the Australians at the weekend took an early lead. The Kiwis fought back a bit. It was only 18-12 at half-time, but the Aussies never looked as though they were going to lose, did they?
Yeah.
And that was a bit frustrating for the Kiwis, I think.
That's right. I think when you watch the Australian side play, you can really see how much the State of Origin arena benefits the Australian team, just because
no doubt
there's a few connections. Obviously, they've got that 6, 7, 9 spine from the Maroons, and then they've got Harry Grant coming off the bench, another Maroons player. So that that combination is just so fluid. There's a lot of fluidity.
It is.
And I just marvelled at Lindsay Collins' performance, scoring a double within 10 minutes of coming on the field.
Absolutely. I'd just say one thing, by the way, about the coverage over here. It was on the Sky red button, wasn't it? And that meant you couldn't record the game, at least on my system. So that was very frustrating. And I'm not sure why Sky felt, the match was so unimportant that it could be put on the red button as opposed to what was on the main channels, and that was disappointing. I hope that doesn't happen again. I certainly hope it I think this weekend's game is going to be on Sky Sports Arena, if I remember correctly, and I certainly hope it is. But it was a game that was disappointing not to be able to record and sort of look at again, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kangaroos did it without Payne Haas and Tino Fa'asua Malawi, so they'll come back this week. And I think New Zealand will pretty much go into this weekend's game unchanged, I think. So, yeah, it's going to be a tough ask for them, but I'm expecting a tougher battle. Well,
they're going to be at home, supported by their own supporters, aren't they? The Kiwis. So that will certainly fire them up. But we've seen on many occasions in the past that that's not quite enough to get them over the line.
Did you see the try Dylan Edwards scored where Hamaso Tabuai-Fidow left Joey Manu in the dust?
Yes, absolutely brilliant.
That was outstanding.
There were some great tries, weren't there?
Yeah. And in the final match-up over the weekend in the men's, Fiji 43 defeated PNG 16. This came as a bit of a surprise to me.
It came as a surprise to me as well. But again, don't forget that the final of that tournament is this coming Sunday as well, when it'll be Fiji v Papua New Guinea again. Did you see the try by Jason Gary?
Yeah.
We've made it the try of the week, actually, in League Express. Brilliant young player. I really hope that Jason gets a lot of opportunities for Castleford this coming season, and I'm sure he will do, because he's got such enormous, ability in terms of footwork, pace, and the ability to spot an opening and so on. And the game was already won by the time he scored that try. I think he scored it quite late on, didn't he? But, I think, when was it? The 65th minute. But, the PNG fans must have been a bit disappointed at their performance. And there were quite a lot of players playing for PNG who played this year in Super League. Neil McDonald was on the wing. Lachlan Lamb was at half-back. Edwin Ipapi at hooker. Rhys Martin in the back row. And Wellington Albert was playing off the bench. And Kevin Appo, who played for Bradford this year, was also on the bench. So there's quite a lot of English, linked representation. And, they would have been really disappointed. It's going to be interesting to see whether Justin Holbrook, their coach, makes any major changes to his squad this weekend.
And like the Australian Kiwis game, I think it will be a lot tighter this weekend.
I'm sure it will, yes.
I'm looking forward to that matchup. We also had the women's game, so Kiwis 12 defeated the Jillaroos 6, so great to see the Kiwi girls going to win.
Magnificent, yeah. That was a magnificent win for the Kiwis, and the first time they've beaten Australia since, I think it's 2015, isn't it? No, I thought they were absolutely outstanding, and great to see, because the Kiwis, the Jillaroos hammered them in the World Cup final last year at Old Trafford, and I thought they'd probably win comfortably again, but, what do I know? Especially about Women's Rugby League, I suppose. But all credit to the Kiwis. They had an absolutely wonderful performance, a very tight game, but, what a win for them. And congratulations from us.
Absolutely. Now, we will move on to the news. So, obviously, we had the IMG gradings release last week. What was your initial reaction to all of this, Martin?
Well, I'm in one sense, I'm very supportive of these of this move, because I think I'm very opposed to relegation. Because I think relegation in our competition, you don't have it in Australia, and I think it poses all sorts of problems for the clubs that it affects, and very often comes very close to to destroying them. Fortunately for Wakefield Trinity, that won't happen to them this year, because they've just been taken over by a new owner who's very wealthy, and I'm glad to say I'm going to be meeting him tomorrow. That's on Wednesday. And I'm very much looking forward to meeting Matthew Ellis. I'm sure he's a great guy, and he's going to do a great job for Wakefield Trinity. But in the normal course of events, when we've seen some of the clubs, like Bradford, for example, who were relegated and didn't have a wealthy benefactor, and to suddenly have your income probably halved or more than halved within a very short space of time, it's disastrous. So I'm broadly in favour of this new system that's coming in, with plenty of reservations. But the crucial thing for me is that when you bring in a new system, the thing that's always awkward is the transition to a new system. And we've seen already that the transition, as things stand, unless the rules are changed, London Broncos might as well not bother turning up to Super League next year, because they're way behind. They're 24th ranked in the gradings league table. They've got a grade of only 8.07, which is only marginally above grade C. They're the bottom grade B side. There's no possible way, I don't think, and I'd love them to prove me wrong, but I don't think there's any way that they could get up to become one of the top 12 clubs next year as a grade B club. So they will inevitably be relegated after one season. So when you know that's going to happen, Jake, what do you do? How do you handle it? Do you try and recruit the most expensive players you can for one season? I mean, you'd be crazy to do that, wouldn't you? The only sensible thing to do from their point of view, I would say, is to keep as a part-time club and bank the money, basically. Bank the money they're going to get as a Super League club. But that will bring the Super League competition, in my view, into disrepute. The solution I've written a letter to Tony Sutton, the chief exec of the RFL, who seems to have dug his heels in on this on this business, and I've published a letter in my column in the paper this week. But they've got to, in my view, change the rules next year so that the lowest. I mean, there will only be potentially 5 Grade B teams in Super League next year, which of course are Salford, Huddersfield, Leigh, Castleford, and London. And in my view, whichever of those teams finishes bottom of Super League, that's the team that should be relegated. And similarly with the Championship, whichever team finishes top of the Championship, assuming they're a Grade B side, that's the side that should be promoted. Otherwise, what's the point of competing, in both Super League and the Championship? And the crazy thing is, they're going to have conventional promotion relegation between the Championship and League One, but not between the Super League and the Championship. That's just nuts. It's just nuts, and it's crazy. And I'm not the only person who's been emailing Tony Sutton. I mean, since this has been published, I've been told that quite a lot of other people have emailed him to point out this problem, and also emailed the RFL chairman Simon Johnson to point out the problem. And as yet, they've not amended it. They need to. They need to. Tony Sutton needs to show some leadership. He can't just accept the IMG proposals without any amendment where it's sensible to amend them. And I would say they've already amended IMG's proposals, because IMG proposed, 12 clubs in Super League, a 22-match Super League season, doing away with loop fixtures, doing away with Magic Weekend. And the RFL, at the club's behest, have overturned that. They've decided to keep 27 fixtures next year and keep the Magic Weekend. So if they can do it in that context, surely they can do it here, where it's shouting out to them to change the rules.
What is the incentive for Championship sides on that Grade B sort of ranking? What's the incentive for them to keep competing in the years going forward? Is it that Super League may possibly expand in years to come?
Yes, there is talk. The idea behind this grading system is that when there are 12 Grade A clubs, they will form Super League, and then if there are any more Grade A clubs, they will expand Super League to 14. Right. So I think that will happen eventually. I'm not quite sure when, of course. But, all those clubs that are Grade B clubs and on the verge of qualifying for Super League. I mean, if you go down to Bradford Bulls in 14th place, they've got 12.02 points. So they're just 3 points short of a Grade A licence. And for a club outside Super League to score that highly is actually quite impressive. So whether whether they'll be able to improve that score up to a 15 eventually. Who knows? But that's the aim, isn't it?
What did you make of Tony's comments after the game the other day on BBC?
Well, I just thought he was being, it doesn't seem to me to be willing to answer the key question, which is what's going to be the effect on the game next year if London Broncos are in Super League and they've got no chance of doing anything. And, it'll be dispiriting, not just for them, but for everybody, really. So I don't think Tony's really addressed the issue. He's not replied to my email as yet. I don't know whether he will do, of course, because my email to him was an unsolicited one, so he doesn't, if he doesn't want to reply, he won't do. But I think he's going to be judged by this. He's going to be judged by how successful the year is next year and how successful this whole grading system is. So his neck is on the chopping block, really, and I think he recognises that. He must do, presumably, and it's very brave of him to nail his colours to the mast of something that looks really so faulty. And it's not just that. I also referred in my communication with him to the Championship and League One. It's so obvious that the Championship and League One has to merge because 8 teams in League One, or perhaps 9 teams if Newcastle Thunder get to the starting gate, that's not enough for a viable competition. And I've put forward, I don't know whether you've read it or not, but I've put forward a solution to that problem with 22 or 23 clubs combining in a combined competition to produce a fixture list that would work well, in my view. And I've had a lot of response from League One clubs saying that's just what we're looking for. That's just what, it's an excellent solution. It would work, and we've got to persuade, the RFL and the other clubs to go for it. The trouble with Tony, though, they had a meeting of Championship and League One clubs last week. The League One clubs came along with several proposals for taking the game forward, but most of which involved merging the two competitions. The Championship clubs listened to what they had to say and then more or less collectively said, no, we don't want that. We're happy with things how they are. We want to remain, therefore, as we are. And Tony Sutton said, oh, well, in that case, that's what's going to happen. But it's not his job to just do what the clubs want on the basis of their short-term, narrow-minded, requirements. What his job is to make decisions that are good for the game as a whole. And that's what he's got to do here. He's got to say to these Championship clubs, look, there is a better system that won't damage anything that you're doing, but which will add to the game as a whole. And, I hope it's not too late for him to do that even now, because it's got to be reconsidered. I know there are some people who are trying to call an extraordinary general meeting of the RFL to consider these sorts of issues, and I hope they succeed. One
of the flaws we've touched on over the past couple of weeks was that catchment area grading.
Ridiculous!
And we look at the London Broncos area.
How daft can you get?
Yeah, I mean, you think but you could almost argue that they've got the whole city of London to.
Of course they have. Yes,
pick their players from.
So they got 1 point instead of 1.5 points because the London borough of MARTYN had a population at the last census of 215,000, and the cut-off point is 260,000. I mean, that is just absolutely crackers, isn't it, really? This whole catchment area thing is just ridiculous and should be dropped from these gradings and something else put in its place. I would suggest something linked to academy players and so on and so forth, and the extent to which clubs generate their own talent. That should be in there somewhere. And I'll tell you another potential problem. Tony Sutton on the BBC on Saturday, made somebody, John Wilkin, I think it was, asked him, well, who's going to make the decision on who's in Super League on next year's gradings? And Tony Sutton said, well, nobody will make that decision because it will be the gradings that determine which 12 clubs will be in Super League. But here's a question for Tony. At the moment, Lee are in 12th position with 12.45 points. Castleford are in 13th position with 12.16 points. There you are.
Yeah.
Now, as part of Lee's 12.45 points, they get 0.25 points for winning the Challenge Cup this year. That will disappear next year. So if they don't win the Challenge Cup again or don't win Super League, they'll be down to 12.20, which is very near to 12.16 that Castleford have. What will happen next year if the two clubs in 12th and 13th position both have exactly the same score? If they both got 12.20, for example, who will decide which of those two clubs goes into Super League? Will it be a toss of a coin? Will it be based on some other issue? It's going to be chaotic, and this whole system is a lawyer's charter, in my view, because I think you'll find that a club that's just out of Super League next year will consult its lawyers and bring a case as to why they shouldn't be excluded. I mean, there are all sorts of weaknesses in it. I mean, for example, under the finance thing, you get 4.5 points for finance, but how many of the clubs, in this table have got audited accounts that can be relied upon? If your turnover is below a certain level, you don't have to lodge audited accounts at Companies House. So how reliable are accounts that are not audited? It's I mean, I'm sure that IMG would say that they got information from the clubs about their income and so on and so forth. But how reliable is that information? How have they managed to audit it themselves? I mean, I'm not sure, because they've not said. And again, what's a bit frustrating for me is that IMG have not really responded themselves to many of the questions that people have in relation to this grading system.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at the gradings, are there, apart from Bradford, are there any other teams that really surprised you or stood out?
Well, Toulouse coming 10th with 12.97, just 2 points short of a Grade A license. That surprised me a little bit. And again, I'm not quite sure how they're. I mean, the other thing that is very frustrating, Jake, is that we've not been shown how these grading figures were worked out. We've not been shown, under the 5 headings, how, for example, Toulouse's 12.97 is made up. So without knowing that, it's difficult to comment with any authority on the figure itself. And again, I said to the RFL, surely you're going to release that information. The overall score is not good enough. It's not transparent. I mean, Tony Sutton keeps talking about we're being transparent. Well, they're not. They're not being remotely transparent, because they're not releasing the information that we can make a judgment on. So, this information could have come out of thin air as far as any transparency is concerned. It's just ridiculous to call it transparent, to be honest. It's just a use of words that's very misleading. It's what in the modern parlance that's called misinformation, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely right.
Yeah.
Do you feel as though the club should have been given a few more years to prepare for this dramatic change?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't think the timescale is the problem. It's just how the timescale is going to be handled. As I've said, it's the transitional year that's the problem. I mean, I would have liked, maybe to have had more time to critique this whole system. Yeah, that wouldn't have been a bad thing. But no, it's everything's in the transition, Jake. And if you don't transition well, then I'm afraid the game loses credibility before this system has even come into effect.
Yeah, definitely. Now, anything else IMG gradings you want to touch on before we move on to the next lot of news?
No, I think we've covered it reasonably well. I don't know what our listeners think, but I hope they found that interesting. But, there are so many. I mean, I would also just add one thing about the grading. It as you probably know, we have a Rugby League forum on our website, totalrl.com. If you go onto there, you'll see the forums, and you can register to be a member of the forums. And at the time of writing, I think the thread on the forum that relates to the grading system has got up to about 85 or 90 pages, and that's with about 25 postings on each page. So you're probably talking about, 2,500 or so people putting their opinion. And to be fair, obviously this system has its defenders on there, and it's also got its people who just attack it, really. And it's a bit. I mean, you probably couldn't read through the thread now from beginning to end because you'd be, several nights doing it. But there's a lot of very contrasting opinions. It's a real debate, and in a way, it's a pity that debate didn't happen a lot earlier in quite the same way. Of course, it's happening now because we've got these figures, but there are lots of different opinions. And as I say, some people are defending what the RFL's doing and defending, the fact that London will go into the competition, into Super League next year with very little chance, and some not defending it.
One of the comments I sort of picked up from John Wilkin in the BBC coverage was, he said, this will motivate clubs to improve their facilities and be better. But he said that one of the things that surprises a lot of NRL players when they come over to the Super League is just the standard of facilities and what they're used to and what they're coming to.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, and obviously it's a completely different competition. And at the moment, there's a lot of obsession with clubs over in the NRL around building centre of excellences and
absolutely
huge facilities like that. Obviously, they've got the money to do that. But, yeah, I hope if anything comes out of this, it motivates clubs to really try and improve and strive for that grade A.
Well, I
ranking.
hope so, but they need the money to do it, don't they? And not all clubs have got that. And the great thing about the NRL is that it's a real great money-making machine at the moment. And most of the clubs are solvent in the NRL because the amount they get centrally from the NRL, from the broadcasting contracts exceeds the salary cap in the NRL. And when you're in that position, you're doing well. We're in a different position because the salary cap now is well ahead of the amount of money that the clubs will be getting from the broadcasting deal. And who's going to bridge the gap? It's very difficult. And that's before you start thinking about improving facilities and creating anything like a centre of excellence. So, it's we're stuck in a bit of a rut, and the NRL is powering ahead. And, it's interesting in Australia because the Wallabies did so badly in the Rugby Union World Cup. A lot of people are saying, well, they're being absolutely demolished by the NRL, aren't they, at the moment, in Rugby Union in Australia, and that's certainly happening, and obviously I'm not too upset to see it. But we ought to talk about the NRL and Peter Vlandis, didn't we? Because he was in the White House last week in Washington.
Yeah, I saw a funny interview of him on the Today Show, which is the morning breakfast show on Channel 9 back in Australia, and he had a bit of a joke. I think Carl Stefanovic, the host, asked him if he could steal a set of cutlery from the White House, and I think Peter said that he did take for Carl, so that was funny to hear. But he's obviously over there at the moment trying to promote the Vegas matchup that they've got lined up over the next few years over there. And I tell you what, it's not often that a head of a competition gets invited to the White House, is it?
No, not at all. And Anthony Albanese, your Prime Minister, obviously invited Peter there. The reason he did that, of course, I think probably, they are good mates anyway, I think, to be honest, but I think one reason for doing that, apart from the fact that the NRL is going to America next year, is because Albanese is very keen for PNG to be the next NRL team, and I'm very dubious about that personally. But we'll see whether that happens. They're offering. I saw an article the other day saying they're now offering about $25 million. And when somebody offers you $25 million for something, it's very difficult to say no, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And but I hope they do a proper process of inviting bids to be the next 18 to be the 18th NRL clubs. That's, I think, what they ought to do. Inviting bids from Perth, Adelaide, New Zealand, Central Coast perhaps, another applicant from Brisbane and so on, to pick the strongest potential bid that's the best for the game, not just the best for, fighting or deterring China in the South Pacific, which, may or may not be very important, but that's not Rugby League's business, is it?
That's right. And unfortunately, I guess fortunately as well, but finances is one of the biggest criteria ticks you can get. And I think that's why the Dolphins were so successful in their bid. Obviously, they've got a very thriving leagues club attached to their stadium out there that makes a lot of money, so they had a really attractive bid when they were given their NRL licence.
Well, money talks, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's inevitable that PNG does get a team. I would rather see it later rather than sooner. But yeah, 25 million talks, doesn't it? So,
no doubt about it.
Yeah.
And interestingly, Vlandis is very keen to get a major TV deal in America to cover the games next year, isn't he? And we'll see whether that comes out. But they seem to be making progress over there. I think it's Fox One, the channel that's likely to cover the game, which is a channel with a hell of a lot of reach. So I really hope that the Vegas thing works well, and Vlandis thinks there's an awful lot of potential gambling money that could come into Rugby League, and that's controversial, of course. And there is a move in Australia itself to remove gambling from being linked with sport, isn't there? There's you've got Penrith's and Cronulla's stadiums, carrying the names of gambling organisations at the moment. You've got several clubs with gambling companies on the front of their shirts and so on, and that could potentially be made illegal at some point fairly soon there. So you've got to be a bit careful, and you've got to keep looking at generating income from other sources.
Well, that's it. It's almost like the new tobacco sponsorship, isn't it? Like we had the Winfield Cup back in the day. Yeah. That's no longer with us. You don't really see any cigarettes.
No, gambling's going the same way.
We still got alcohol advertisements, like VB, Blues, Tui's New Blues, that sort of thing.
That might go as well eventually. Who knows? We are becoming a more a society that thinks more about those sorts of issues, and inevitably people in parliaments around the world will make decisions probably based on public health issues, I suppose. So we'll have to see how that goes.
Absolutely. The other thing I wanted to touch on was with this tournament that's going on at the moment against Tonga, there's been a few English players that have been linked with NRL clubs. Obviously, Jack Wellesby's always had his name thrown out there. Apparently, there's 3 clubs interested in gauging if he'd be interested in coming over. Harry Newman, I think, was mentioned as a potential target. And was it Morgan Smithy signed with the Raiders?
He signed with the Raiders, yes. He has signed, apparently. And Harry Smith's been mentioned as well, and, he'd be... I mean, a lot of these guys would be, potentially really good recruits, especially halfback. The halfbacks are worth their weight in gold in the NRL, as we've already talked about Tonga's weaknesses in those positions. And I think Harry Smith is the sort of guy who would go well in the NRL, I think. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. He's just the way he steers that
he's a very calm guy on the field, I think.
And sometimes just the little things he does that doesn't often get noticed, but when you really sit there and you pull apart the game, you find out his fingerprints are all over it.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think he would do really well, and it'd just be some of these big transfer fees that clubs are going to have to pay. And I wonder to myself, should we be doing everything we can to keep these players in Super League?
Well, at the end of the day, we've already said it, money talks, haven't we? And I mean, the one thing that we do have here that they don't have in Australia is we have 3 marquee players potentially, and those marquee players can be paid any amount. And you don't, as I say, you don't have that in the NRL. No. So potentially, if say the Wigan's new owner, who's a guy called Mike Danson, who's a very wealthy guy, if he felt like paying Harry Smith £1 million a year, let's say, for sake of argument, he could do, and that would probably go a long way to keeping Harry Smith in in Super League. Whether he'd want to do that, of course, I don't know. I can't speak for Mike Danson, certainly. But that's the potential solution. If if all the clubs have got very wealthy backers who can splash out on their top players, then that would potentially stop them going to Australia, wouldn't it? But on the face of it, the discrepancy between the money available in the NRL and in Super League now is so significant that you can't see a way of stopping players from this country who are, attracted to the idea of going to the NRL. You can't see a way of stopping them. We've got, the two guys, Guy Pearce-Poole and young Will Price going to Newcastle next year. We've mentioned Morgan Smithies, and there will be others, as time goes on.
Yeah. And what do you think the general feeling is amongst fans over here? Do you think they're excited to see these players going over and testing themselves in the NRL, or do you think it's a bit bittersweet seeing them leave?
Well, some fans do enjoy watching the NRL, don't they? There's a lot of English fans. I mean, the NRL is very accessible nowadays, and it's generally played in front of bigger crowds with, most of the world's star players. So a lot of people love watching it. But having said that, a lot of fans of clubs in this country would love nothing more than not to lose their players. I can't imagine any St Helens fan would want to see Jack Wellsby going to the NRL. And I'm pretty sure the chairman, Eamon McManus, would be in that boat as well. Nobody wants to lose their best players. So I think most fans would wish those players well if they did go, but I just can't see them, wanting them to go.
Especially when he's contracted until the end of 2025. So
yes, exactly,
to lose him early would be quite heartbreaking.
To lose him early, though, the other point is if you lose him early, at least you get a transfer fee, which would be quite significant.
They're throwing £700,000 is the figure being thrown around. Which
well,
would be
maybe, but some NRL clubs would have that money.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, before we wrap it up, I also wanted to touch on your reaction to Sean Wayne's emotional post-match interview the other day. He really gave it to the Tongans for having excuses after game one. Obviously, they proved them wrong. Obviously, England belted them again in game two. But what was your reaction to it?
Oh, I mean, Sean's a very emotional guy, clearly, and always has been and always will be.
Yep.
And he takes a lot of things personally, and I know that because I know when the odd occasion when I've written, negative things about him, he does take it. It takes things very personally, and certainly doesn't take kindly to what he sees as unjustified criticism. So, and he's quite prepared to say that. There's nothing anodyne about Sean, is there? He's what you see is what you get, and I thought actually. Christian Wolf handled it quite well afterwards because Christian was asked what he thought of it, and he just said, "Well, I'm not bothered at all. That's if he wants to react that way, that's fine, and I'll react in the way that I react." Yeah, and that was fine. It was quite a nice contrast between the two of them.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think my only regret about Sean, I wish Sean would open up to the media a bit more before games.
Yeah.
And would realise that it would be great for him to help to promote games because with the crowds we've been getting, they're not good enough, and a bit of astute comments from Sean might get a few more people in. Although I suspect he wouldn't want to do it because he wouldn't want to fire up the Tongans, would he?
I was wondering whether he chose to save them until after the match, until the series was secured. But I 100% agree. Like, if he had said that leading up to the match, can you imagine? The interest.
Well, we'll see what the effect on the Tongans is this weekend, won't we?
Yeah, absolutely right. And it's great to see, obviously, that passion as well.
Of course it is.
I often get upset when I see coaches in post-match presses not showing more emotion and anger when they've been hard done by a call or whatever.
Yes.
It's
Mind you,
refreshing to see.
they always risk having a fine, don't they, if they do that? In both your competition and in ours.
Oh, Ricky Stewart's had a few, that's for sure. All right, well, anything else you'd like to touch on, Martin, before we wrap things up here today? Obviously, I think the women are playing a game this weekend. England versus Wales.
England versus Wales, yeah.
So
is the curtain raiser at Headingley on the weekend, so get there in plenty of time. I think that kicks off, is it 12:30, if I remember rightly?
Yeah.
And, that game will be shown on BBC Two, I think. The main game will be shown on BBC One, England v Tonga.
Mm-hmm.
And it's looking like another great weekend because, of course, you've got the finals of the Pacific Cup and the Pacific Bowl, which will both be on Sky. So, no, it's another very, very interesting weekend, Jake.
Absolutely. And the cricket, England aren't doing too well in the World Cup at the moment, mate.
It's amazing, isn't it, how the England cricket team goes from high to low in no time at all in different formats of the game.
Yeah.
But fortunately, because it's in India, I don't think most of us have been watching too much of it.
Closely. Yeah. Now, we had a very tighter than it needed to be victory over New Zealand over the weekend.
Well, we lost to Afghanistan, didn't we, I think?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so, my goodness.
Hopefully they can turn things around, but you're not looking good.
Yeah, no.
All right, well, we might end it here. Don't forget, if you do want to subscribe to the League Express weekly newspaper, you can head along to www.totalrl.com/shop. And you can subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to our channel, Total Rugby League. And don't forget, if you are travelling around and you want to keep listening, you can access this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. Wherever you listen to your podcast, we'll be on there. So thanks for listening, guys, and we'll catch up and review Game 3 next week.
We will. Thank you all, and thank you, Jake, for doing this. Thank you.
All good. Thanks, mate. Cheers.